Cowboy Bebop. From the characters we follow to the story it tells, from the opening riff to its vast original soundtrack, this series is iconic. And how could it not be? Originally coming out in 1998 with a movie coming out in 2001, it seemed like the perfect series to premiere in Cartoon Network's new block, Adult Swim, which began September 2nd of 2001. So with the right timing of getting put onto an American TV block, along with being a part of the English dubbing boom, which was reignited by the channel block called Toonami back in 1997. And since the dubbing era continued into the 2000s, it led to Cowboy Bebop not being just a cult classic, but a true classic. Now, before we even get to the story itself, there's quite a bit of information that we can get out of just the name of the series, Cowboy Bebop. The most straightforward explanation is that cowboy is slang for bounty hunter, and Bebop refers to the mothership of our main cast. Hence the name Cowboy Bebop, or bounty hunters of the ship Bebop. Looking another way, cowboy might refer to how much this series feels like a western. Our main characters drift from town to town, in this case planet to planet, with all sorts of gunslinging, fistfighting, bounties, and damsels. And while I need to expand my western repertoire past Tombstone and the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, I think it's an apt comparison. On the other hand, bebop is a subgenre of jazz, and while it has a lot of descriptors, simply put, it's a faster tempo that's more upbeat, which is what most of Cowboy Bebop's original soundtrack consists of, including the track you're listening to now, Piano Black. Getting to the series itself, I would describe Cowboy Bebop as being a science fiction episodic adventure, sci-fi for the sake of starships and space technology, episodic as each episode tells its own story, and adventure for the many different locations we visit and the dangers we overcome along the way. And while each episode has their own focus, sometimes comedy, other times action, more than a few times sad, every episode follows a loose structure. We start by finding a case, mission, or goal, then spend time to investigate information about said goal. We then do one final play to meet our resolution, which may not turn out exactly as we had hoped. Though what's interesting is that the solution they use for their final plan is often teased earlier in the episode. So while the resolution is treated as a surprise in the moment, if you're paying attention earlier, you likely know what actually happened. And yet each resolution is heavily dependent on the core character that we're following at the time. Speaking of core characters, I think it's time we take a closer look. At the beginning of the show, our ship, the Bebop, consists of two crew members. Starting with the arguable protagonist of the show, we have Spike Spiegel. With an aloof attitude and matching attire to boot, he seems entirely unconcerned with the world around him. But don't let that fool you. Not only is he a master at pickpocketing and sleight of hand, being previously employed by a certain syndicate has left him with a repertoire of close combat techniques and more experience with gunfights than you or I will ever know. While he seems quite reckless and uncaring, I'd say that's the perfect mask to hide how calculating he truly is, as a lot of what would be considered mistakes just happen to fall into his favor. But don't forget that we're in a sci-fi series. Spike is also quite the skilled pilot, not of the Bebop itself, but his own personal spacecraft, the Swordfish 2, which fits inside the Bebop's hangar and can be launched whether in space or on the surface. And while he has a rivalry with a man named Vicious, Spike spends most of his time now acting as a bounty hunter, using the culmination of his skills to put his next meal on the table. But this lifestyle wouldn't have been possible for Spike if it wasn't for the owner of the Bebop, Jet Black. While currently a bounty hunter and the owner of the Bebop, along with his smaller ship the Hammerhead, Jet used to be a member of the ISSP, aka the Intersolar System Police. And while he did great work with them, an injury combined with a failed relationship led to him trying to make his own fresh start. So with a new arm and no attachments to keep him behind, Jet left his home planet, or moon in this case, of Ganymede and became a bounty hunter. So while he's no longer part of the law, he still makes his money by chasing down criminals. And while he may not be as adept in combat as Spike, his time in the ISSP served him well, showing him how to use his size and strength in close combat, with plenty of times to give cover fire when necessary. In addition to being the effective captain of the Bebop, Jet is also the main mechanic and the main chef of the crew. And when you add in his information gathering skills along with his old connection at the ISSP, that makes him a prime source of support for Spike, whether Jet relays him information from the ship or helps him directly in the field. This crew of 2 already makes quite a good team, but neither of them were expecting the additions the future will bring. Starting with Ein, the Welsh Corgi, and while he appears normal, due to being experimented on by a certain company, Ein is what's known as a data dog. As a result of said experiments, Ein has a form of superintelligence. It's just that, being a dog, he has no way to convey his complex thoughts and reasoning to the rest of the crew. Yet he knows the right time when he needs to step in personally, and when he needs to warn the others of danger that they haven't foreseen yet. Though if I were to make any complaint, it's that even though he's a member of the crew, Ein feels like a side character, which is due to his relatively small amount of screen time. It doesn't necessarily make him a bad character, but I think it would have been cool if he had a few more interactions with the other crew members. While picking up a dog off the street is a happy accident, our next crew member has a few special circumstances. Almost as if she were a woman from another time, we have Faye Valentine. And while she comes off as a femme fatale, her true abilities come from the tricks and cons that she's learned in order to fight the enormous amount of debt that she has. This has made her prone to gambling to try and make it big and clear her debt in one fell swoop. The gambling goes about what you'd expect, and when in between casinos and horse races, she does bounty hunting to pay for her daily necessities and giving her some gambling funds on the side. And while she's shown to have some potential in hand-to-hand combat, she seems much more confident in using a firearm and using the element of surprise, whether by the way of sneaking up behind someone or using her feminine wiles. Though it's due to Faye's reckless behavior that she ends up in situations that are way in over her head. You might think this makes her too much of a damsel in distress, but I'd say she's simply smart enough to wait for her best opportunity. She's also quite the adept pilot, operating her spacecraft, the Red Tail, which is neither red nor has a tail, and yet she's shown herself being capable in dogfights, ground support, and fine motor operations. And while she claims to prefer her solitude being alone than being the loner of a group, she makes a fine addition to the Bebop crew. Which leads us into our final accrued crew member, known as Radical Edward, though that's actually her hacker name, with her original name being Francois Appledelly, but everyone calls her Red. And while she seems like an awkward child whose only concern is food, she has a hyper-aware knack for technology, particularly for devices connected to the outer net, which is basically the internet, but in space. So while Ed isn't much of a fighter, her greatest benefit is her information gathering skills alongside her vast intellect, when she wants to use it anyway. However, Ed suffers a similar problem to Ein, in that she also feels more like a side character than a full crew member. Part of it comes from her being introduced closer to the halfway point of the series, meaning we get a lot less time with her than the rest of the crew members. The other part of it has to do with her actions, which only really consist of hacking, playing, and scrounging for food. And while it's made clear that she's still a child focused on her survival instinct, that doesn't really make her a memorable character with standout events. In fact, I would say that her biggest impact was during her introduction episode. But personal opinions aside, she's still a crew member of the Bebop. In fact, on my latest rewatch of Cowboy Bebop, I noticed something quite interesting about the crew. Honestly, they're all quite dysfunctional. They're all stubborn, fail to communicate, prefer to work solo, don't want to share their pasts, yell and cuss at each other, are focused on themselves above all, and yet they still try to back each other up. And this has to deal with the one fear that they all share, the fear of loss. Spike Spiegel left the criminal syndicate he was a part of. Even though he left people he knew behind, Spike knows if he were to visit them now, they'll likely be seen as traitors and be killed because of him. Jet Black had a good job and a good relationship going on, but when the girl left and he devoted himself to his work, which led to him losing his arm, that's a hard thing to bounce back from. Especially since the woman's complaint was that he was too perfect and she'd rather do things her way even if it was a mistake. I don't blame him for not trying again. Faye Valentine, we find out, lost everything due to an accident, even her memory, so now she's stuck in a world that she doesn't know with no one she can trust, with a debt from the accident she survived. Ed was effectively abandoned, and while she spent time at an orphanage, she ended up fleeing there to find something the orphanage couldn't provide. Ein is, well, Ein. But for the rest of the crew members, they have all experienced their own forms of loss, so in order to prevent experiencing future loss, they avoid making attachment now. So while none of them are willing to admit it, if not purposely go out of the way to show they oppose it, they all have a shared sense of comfort on the Bebop, and with one another. So while it's not the cleanest sort of relationship, it is a kind of family. So while we cover the soundtrack, I'll share a couple extra opinions. I saw the series sub and the movie dubbed. For the sub versus dub, I think the characters feel slightly different, but they're both good. Besides, my favorite line from the dub has to be this line here.
Love the kind of woman that can kick my ass.
To quick cover the movie, it takes place between episode 22 and 23 of the main series. It feels like a single episode in and of itself, and while the highlights are good, it definitely feels much longer and slower than a normal episode. I think it was a fun watch and a nice addition for fans, but I like the episodes of the main series better. Now, Cowboy Bebop has a sister series by the name of Samurai Champloo. I had always liked Samurai Champloo more than Cowboy Bebop, mainly because I saw it first, but I may have to give it another rewatch and see if it compares to what I think of Cowboy Bebop now. There are likely several series now that have similar plot points or story beats to Cowboy Bebop, and might even do them better. But that just goes to show how much influence Cowboy Bebop still has, and that it truly was, and still is, an icon.